Picture yourself as the IRGC air defense commander sitting in a bunker on the Iranian coast. Your radar screen lights up, contacts everywhere, multiple vectors, multiple altitudes, speeds that don't match anything in your threat library. Because what just crossed into Iranian airspace is not a single aircraft. It is not a strike package of the kind your doctrine anticipated. It is a concert, sequenced, layered, coordinated across an 800-mile combat radius. And by the time you fully understand what you are looking at, the opening act has already been performed. The wild weasels were first. The lane was cleared before the main package crossed the fence, and now the entire country is about to discover what happens when the most sophisticated air power on Earth goes full send against a target set that is not just military hardware. The control tower at Chabahar is gone. The marine piers are destroyed. The railway bridge connecting Tehran to China and Russia is down, and the three-legged stool on which the entire Iranian strategic theory rested just had every leg kicked out from under it in a single 48-hour operational window. But let's back all the way up, because to understand what just happened and why the specific targets chosen in this strike package represent something categorically different from everything that came before it, you need to understand the strategic theory that Iran has been operating on since this conflict began, and why that theory just died at Chabahar. Iran's approach to this confrontation has never been about winning a conventional military engagement. The Islamic Republic knew from the first day of Operation Fury that it could not match American air power in a symmetrical fight. It has no credible air force. Its surface-to-air missile networks, while layered, have been demonstrated under combat conditions to be penetrable by the suppression campaign that American Wild Weasel aircraft execute with AGM-88 HARM missiles. Its naval assets were always going to be outmatched by what the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group can put in the air on any given sortie cycle. The regime's leadership understood all of this. And so the strategy was never to defeat the United States militarily. It was to survive the United States militarily, while making the cost of the confrontation high enough for the global economy that Washington would eventually accept terms that preserved the regime's core institutional interests. That survival strategy rested on three structural pillars. The first was the Strait of Hormuz. Control it. Threaten it. Use it as the loaded gun pointed at the global oil market that would make every American administration think twice before allowing this conflict to reach its logical conclusion. The regime calculated that no president, regardless of stated resolve, would allow 20% of the world's traded oil to be genuinely cut off long enough to trigger the kind of global economic cascade that would cost the United States more than it gained. The strait was the negotiating lever that was supposed to make every conversation happen on Iranian terms. The second pillar was Chabahar, Iran's deep-water port on the Indian Ocean, strategically positioned outside the Strait of Hormuz, was the economic bypass that made strait leverage theoretically survivable. Even if the United States contested Hormuz, even if naval pressure was applied, Chabahar was the valve that stayed open. Trade that could not flow through conventional Persian Gulf channels could flow through the Indian Ocean instead. Revenue that Western sanctions were designed to cut off could arrive through Chabahar. The regime could sustain itself financially, keep the IRGC paid, keep the militia payrolls current, keep the domestic subsidy system that buys minimum social compliance functional, because Chabahar existed as the escape route from maximum economic pressure. The third pillar was the Eastern Rail Corridor. The railway, running northeast through Iran toward Mashhad, and then connecting through Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan to the supply chains of China and Russia, was not a convenience. It was the physical lifeline through which the IRGC was quietly importing everything it needed but could not procure through Western-controlled financial and logistics systems. Military components from Russian defense enterprises, industrial equipment from Chinese state manufacturers. Sanctioned technology moving through corridors that Western enforcement mechanisms were structurally constrained in their ability to monitor or interdict. The rail line was the thread that kept the Islamic Republic connected to the two great powers that had calculated that Iran's survival, even under pressure, even under maximum sanctions, served their strategic interests better than the chaos of Iranian collapse. Those three pillars constituted the full architecture of Iran's theory of resilience. As long as all three held, the regime could absorb whatever military punishment Washington delivered, outlast whatever diplomatic pressure the international community assembled, and eventually reach a negotiated settlement from a position of managed survival, if not outright strength. And then the strikes came, and the Chabahar control tower went dark, and the railway bridge fell, and the regime's chief negotiator, Kalibaf, went on social media to say that the Strait of Hormuz will only open with Iranian arrangements and not American threats, while the physical infrastructure that made Iranian arrangements viable was being systematically demolished. The Chabahar control tower was not simply a piece of navigation infrastructure. That deserves to be stated as precisely as the available evidence allows. The tower was the node through which Iran had converted a nominally civilian maritime facility into a dual-use military instrument. According to operational assessment, Iranian forces were using the technology within that tower not merely to help ships determine their position and navigate the waters near the strait, the stated civilian function, but to actively track, designate, and direct drone and ballistic missile strikes against commercial vessels transiting the international waterway. The Chabahar control tower was, in operational terms, a targeting node for a system that had been attacking civilian mariners in international waters. Its destruction was not incidental to the campaign. It was a primary objective: the elimination of the facility through which the regime was conducting maritime attacks while hiding behind the legal fiction of civilian navigation management. The marine piers at Chabahar were struck in the same package. The physical loading and unloading infrastructure of the port, the facilities through which cargo was transferred between vessels and Iran's land transport network, damaged and degraded alongside the command technology that was directing military operations from the same facility. Chabahar, as a functioning logistics node for both the civilian economy and the IRGC's military supply chain, ceased to exist as a viable asset in a single operational night. And then the railway bridge in the northeast. This target sits on one of the most strategically significant transport corridors in the entire country, the rail line connecting Tehran to Mashhad in the northeast, and through Mashhad outward through Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan to the broader Eurasian supply network that connects Iran to Russia and China. The IRGC has confirmed, and this is worth pausing on because the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps voluntarily acknowledging American targeting success is not something that happens unless the destruction is so visible and so well documented that denial would cost more credibility than admission. The IRGC confirmed that 2 bridges on this route to Mashhad were struck. 2 confirmed destroyed. Iranian passenger rail service between Tehran and Mashhad has been fully suspended as a result. The rail system connecting the capital to the second largest city in the country and, more critically, to the eastern supply corridor that runs through Turkmenistan toward Russia and China is in operational disarray. Read what that confirmation actually means. The organization that spent years denying that its proxies fired the missiles that were filmed on radar being fired by its proxies, that claimed facility explosions caught on satellite imagery were industrial accidents, that attributed its own military setbacks to everything except the truth, voluntarily confirmed that American strikes destroyed infrastructure on one of its most strategically critical supply routes. The transparency was not chosen. It was compelled by circumstances. When the destruction is visible from satellite imagery, when the passenger trains have stopped running, when the truck drivers have no bridge to cross, the denial machinery cannot function. And the moment the IRGC's denial machinery fails is the moment that tells you the strike hit something real. Now, let us build the operational picture of how all of this was executed, because the architecture of the strike package that produced these results is itself part of the strategic message. Understanding what flew, what it carried, and how the sequence was designed reveals why the IRGC's air defense network, despite years of development, despite layers of surface-to-air missile batteries, despite the radar networks that were supposed to provide early warning and engagement capability, was essentially powerless to prevent what happened. The F-16 CJ Wild Weasel was almost certainly the opening move. Its entire operational existence is defined by a single mission: suppression of enemy air defenses. The F-16 CJ carries the AGM-88 high-speed anti-radiation missile, which homes in on the electromagnetic emissions produced by active radar systems. The logic of this weapon is elegant and brutal simultaneously. The moment an Iranian radar operator activates his system to search for incoming threats, there's the trained instinct, the required action, the thing every air defense operator is supposed to do. That activation broadcasts the radar's precise location to an AGM-88 that is already inbound looking for exactly that signal. The Iranian operator faces a choice with no good options: activate and survive the next several seconds while painting a target on the position, or stay dark and lose the situational awareness that air defense operations depend on. The Wild Weasel campaign does not merely destroy individual radar installations. It collapses the institutional will of radar operators who understand that turning on their equipment is an invitation to be killed. The suppression is as much psychological as it is physical, and its effect is to clear the lane before the strike package that follows has even entered the threat environment. The F-15E Strike Eagles came next. The AGM-158B, the extended-range variant of the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, can be loaded onto the F-15E and released from well outside the effective engagement range of whatever Iranian surface-to-air systems survived the Wild Weasel opening. A standoff cruise missile navigates itself to its target after release, using GPS guidance, terrain matching, and terminal electro-optical or infrared seekers to find the specific aim point that was briefed in the planning cell hours before the crew walked to the aircraft. The weapon system operator in the rear seat has locked the targeting pod on the exact coordinate. The weapon releases. The F-15E is already maneuvering to egress, or, in the fully cleared threat environment, descending to the deck for a low-level return that uses terrain masking rather than altitude for protection. For targets that standoff munitions cannot adequately address, hardened reinforced concrete, deeply buried facilities, infrastructure designed to survive near misses, the F-15E carries 5,000-pound penetrating bombs and 2,000-pound laser-guided munitions. The ripple of JDAMs coming off an F-15E in a cleared threat environment, with the targets confirmed through targeting pod imagery against the briefing material, is the operational expression of American precision strike capability at its most efficient. The F-18 Super Hornets off the USS Abraham Lincoln provided the naval aviation component. The carrier was operating in the Arabian Sea, and media reporters embedded on the flight deck watched jets launch off the catapults in real time, a deliberate operational transparency that sent its own message to every military audience watching. When the United States allows news cameras on the flight deck of a carrier conducting combat operations, the message is not merely about the operations themselves. It is about confidence. An institution that is uncertain about its operational results does not invite cameras to watch. The Abraham Lincoln catapults were launching strike-configured aircraft, and the world watched them go. The B-1B Lancer adds a dimension to this picture that changes the strategic calculus of any adversary trying to calculate what American air power can do in a single coordinated strike window. A single B-1B carries 24 JASSMs internally, Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missiles, the same class of precision cruise missile that the AGM-158B represents. A two-aircraft formation of B-1Bs puts 48 precision cruise missiles into a single coordinated strike package from a platform that operates at altitudes and speeds that make Iranian air defense engagement extremely difficult under even the best defensive conditions. Those 48 missiles are not a barrage. They're individually targeted, individually guided, individually optimized to reach specific aim points that cannot be protected by anything the IRGC has been able to field. And the naval component adds further depth. Tomahawks launched from surface combatants and submarines operating in the Arabian Sea. The submarine-launched variant departs from a platform that has no surface signature, no radar emission, and no acoustic profile detectable by the coast-watching systems that Iran operates in the Strait approaches. The missiles rise from the water and navigate to their targets without announcing their origin. Taken together, this is not a strike campaign. It is a suppression architecture, a strike architecture, an intelligence architecture, and a logistics architecture, all functioning simultaneously across a combat radius that covers the entire Iranian landmass. ISR platforms provide real-time targeting updates. Tanker aircraft extend the operational endurance of every platform in the package. F-22 Raptors and F-35s maintain air superiority in the threat environment, providing the cover under which the strike aircraft can operate without defensive fighters being able to contest them. Every element of this chain is sequenced, coordinated, and designed to present the adversary with more simultaneous problems than any single defensive system can solve. The IRGC's air defense network was built to handle one problem at a time. American air power sent it 100 problems simultaneously, and the Chabahar control tower is the visible proof of the outcome. Now, let us be honest about what Iran still has in this fight, because intellectual honesty requires acknowledging residual capability alongside destroyed capability. The Shahab-3 ballistic missile, in its solid fuel intermediate range configuration, has a stated reach of approximately 1,000 miles. The IRGC has been expending these in salvos aimed at American bases and Allied positions across the region, including a documented launch of 10 ballistic missiles at Al-Azraq Air Base in Jordan. The IRGC subsequently claimed to have struck 8 different bases across the Middle East. The operational reality, every missile fired at Jordan was intercepted. Not most, not the majority, all of them. The Patriot battery operators and the integrated air defense networks that link American and Allied defensive systems across the region have been intercepting Iranian ballistic missiles at rates that falsify the regime's deterrence theory in real time. The IRGC launched. Nothing got through. And the IRGC is now in the analytically difficult position of expending finite, irreplaceable ballistic missile inventory against defensive systems that are demonstrating, engagement by engagement, that the inventory is being consumed without commensurate operational results. That intercept record matters enormously for the strategic picture. The IRGC's missile force was supposed to be the equalizer, the capability that gave a regime with no credible air force and no peer naval power the ability to impose unacceptable costs on American and Allied forces in the region, threatening regional infrastructure at a scale that would make the political cost of the confrontation unsustainable for Washington. If that missile force cannot achieve reliable penetration rates against American and Allied missile defense coverage, the entire deterrence theory based on it is revealed as theoretical rather than operational. Every missile intercepted is a data point falsifying the theory. After enough data points, the theory is not modified. It is abandoned. The IRGC's commanders are accumulating those data points in real time, and the frustration visible in the regime's rhetoric, the escalating threats, the demand for drone and missile attacks that produce limited confirmed impacts against Gulf states, is the institutional expression of watching a deterrence architecture fail under the conditions it was built to address. There is another dimension of this conflict that has received less attention than it deserves, and it involves the specific decision the Secret Service made about which aircraft carries the President of the United States during this period. Iran publicly threatened Air Force One. That threat was not issued through back channels or private diplomatic communication. It was stated publicly through official Iranian government channels as a declared hostile intent against the aircraft carrying the American commander-in-chief. The Secret Service responded by placing President Trump on the older VC-25A, the baby blue Boeing 747 that has served as the presidential transport for decades, not the new Qatari gifted aircraft that is in the process of being transitioned into presidential service. The reasoning behind that decision is operationally significant and publicly understandable. The older aircraft has been through every security testing protocol, every hardening program, every countermeasures upgrade, and every real-world operational challenge that the American intelligence community has encountered across the full span of its presidential service. Its survivability systems have been validated not through laboratory testing, but through decades of actual operational deployment in threat environments that include direct adversarial attention. The new aircraft, however capable in its baseline configuration, has not completed the full hardening and operational validation cycle that the older platform has accumulated. Until the new presidential transport completes that cycle, expected around 2028, the aircraft with the longest operational validation history is the aircraft that carries the president when a foreign government has publicly declared its intent to shoot it down. The old blue 747 is not a second-tier option. It is the proven option, and the decision to use it communicates something specific to the Iranian government. Your threat was registered, taken seriously, and answered with the most capable protective asset available rather than the most impressive-looking one. The chief negotiator's public statement through this period deserves precise analytical attention because it reveals the internal contradiction at the heart of the regime's position. Kalibaf announced that the Strait of Hormuz will only open with Iranian arrangements, not American threats, and that if strikes continue, Iran will respond. That statement was issued as a posture of strength, as the declaration of an institution that retains both the will and the capability to dictate the terms of its own situation. But consider the operational context in which the statement was made. It was issued while the Chabahar control tower was destroyed, while the railway bridge connecting Iran to Russia and China was down, while the IRGC was itself confirming that American strikes had hit infrastructure on the Mashhad corridor. Kalibaf's defiance was performed against the backdrop of a country that had just lost its port, its northeastern railway bridge, and the maritime targeting infrastructure that was directing attacks on commercial shipping, all in a single 48-hour window. The posture of strength and the operational reality of destruction existed simultaneously, and the gap between them is the most honest available measurement of where the regime actually stands. Three-track pressure analysis explains why the convergence of this specific moment is strategically different from every previous exchange in this conflict. The financial pressure track has now reached the infrastructure through which Iranian revenue was flowing. Chabahar was not merely a port. It was the bypass mechanism that allowed the regime to generate commercial revenue despite Western sanctions. It is gone. The Eastern Rail Corridor was not merely a transportation route. It was the supply chain through which the IRGC was importing what it needed to sustain operations, despite the military isolation that Western pressure was designed to impose. It is disrupted. Every day those assets are not operational is revenue that does not arrive and supply that does not move. The military pressure track is accelerating rather than stabilizing. More than 170 targets struck across the campaign. The air defense network degraded by wild weasel operations. Ballistic missiles intercepted at rates approaching 100%. The command and communications infrastructure that ties the IRGC's operational picture together being systematically eliminated. And the psychological pressure track, the track that is hardest to measure but ultimately most decisive, is being fed by the IRGC's own confirmed admissions. When an organization that reflexively denies everything cannot deny that its strategic supply corridor has been struck, the internal confidence that institutions require to maintain coherence under pressure begins to fracture in ways that no official statement can fully repair. The Ukraine dimension of the broader strategic picture adds relevant context that the Iran-focused coverage consistently underweights. While the Chabahar strikes were executing and the northeastern railway bridge was coming down, Russia announced its intent to expand its offensive into 2 additional Ukrainian regions and established new buffer zones. Ukrainian forces responded by striking the port city of Taganrog, igniting port infrastructure and an aviation college. A Ukrainian drone set the Ilsky oil refinery on fire. Ukrainian strikes hit Crimea again as part of a 4-day Sea of Azov campaign that has now struck 36 Russian Shadow Fleet tankers, the vessels through which Russia was circumventing sanctions to move energy revenue. Crimea is being systematically pushed toward blackout conditions by Ukrainian drone attrition. Russia, one of the two external supply patrons that Iran was depending on through the now disrupted Eastern Rail Corridor, is simultaneously managing its own infrastructure attrition problem in a different theater. The supply patron cannot fully attend to supplying Iran when its own refinery is burning and its tanker fleet in the Sea of Azov is being systematically destroyed. The two pressure campaigns, one on Iran, one on Russia, are compounding each other's effects in ways that neither adversary has the bandwidth to fully address. The honest assessment of where the three-legged stool now stands is this. Leg 1, Hormuz leverage, exists in rhetorical form but not in operational form. The strait is being contested but not closed. American naval and air assets are escorting commercial shipping and striking the assets that the IRGC is attempting to use for interdiction. The closure claim is a declaration, not an operational reality. Leg 2, Chabahar economics, is destroyed. The port's control tower is gone, the marine piers are struck, and the facility is not a functioning logistics bypass for the Iranian economy right now. Leg 3, the Eastern Rail Corridor, is disrupted. 2 bridges on the Mashhad route are confirmed down by the IRGC's own admission. Passenger rail is suspended. The corridor that was supposed to connect Iran to Chinese and Russian supply chains while sanctions were attempting to isolate it is in operational disarray. All 3 legs have been struck in a single 48-hour window, and the stool has no 4th leg to balance on while repairs are attempted. What the Islamic Republic faces right now is not simply a military setback. It is a structural crisis in the theory of its own survival. The architecture that was supposed to make it resilient against exactly the kind of pressure the United States has now applied was not a theoretical framework. It was built piece by piece over years. Chabahar developed as the Indian Ocean bypass. The rail corridor maintained and expanded as the Eastern supply lifeline. The Hormuz threat operationalized through years of fast boat, drone, and missile development along the southern coast. Every element of that architecture was constructed with this confrontation in mind. And in a single 48-hour window, the United States military reached into that architecture and destroyed the physical infrastructure through which it functioned. The theory of Iranian resilience did not fail because of a conceptual error in strategic thinking. It failed because the physical assets through which it was supposed to operate no longer exist. And we return to the radar screen lighting up in the IRGC bunker, the contacts everywhere, the speeds that don't match anything in the threat library, the understanding arriving, too late, that what is crossing Iranian airspace is not a problem the available doctrine can solve. The wild weasels cleared the lane, the Strike Eagles rippled off their munitions, the Hornets launched from the catapults while cameras rolled on the Abraham Lincoln. The B-1Bs put their standoff missiles in the air, the Tomahawks rose from submarines in the Arabian Sea without a surface signature, without a radar emission, without anything to track until they were already navigating toward their targets. And when it was done, the Chabahar control tower was rubble. The marine piers were struck. The railway bridge on the Mashhad corridor was down. The IRGC, the organization that spent decades building the architecture of Iran's strategic resilience, went on record confirming it. The 3-legged stool is on the ground. What the regime does next, stripped of the structural leverage that its entire theory of survival depended on, is the question that every intelligence service and every regional government is now trying to answer. And the available evidence does not yet provide a clean answer. What it provides is the picture of an institution that just discovered, in the most operationally concrete terms available, that the leverage it believed it held was exactly as vulnerable as the physical infrastructure it was built on, and that physical infrastructure just burned. There's a human dimension to this operational period that belongs in any honest accounting of what the conflict costs beyond the strategic balance sheet. Commander Gabriel Edwards, commanding officer of Helicopter C Combat Squadron 5, is gone. His MH-60S helicopter made an emergency water landing in the Arabian Sea, assigned to the USS George H. W. Bush on July 1st. 3 of the 4 crew members were successfully recovered. The search for Edwards was suspended after several days. The Navy identified him publicly, putting his name on the record alongside the operational mission he was serving when the emergency occurred. The commander of Carrier Strike Group 10 released a statement about Edwards that said what these statements are supposed to say but rarely say, with the specific weight of truth that this one carries, that his legacy as a husband, father, friend, and fearless leader will never be forgotten, that the thoughts and prayers of every member of the strike group remain with his family, and that those who knew him carry a unique and indelible part of his memory forward as the mission continues. Those words are not diplomatic language. They are what the people who served alongside Edwards actually believe about him. The mission that took him to the Arabian Sea, that placed him in the aircraft that made the emergency landing is the same mission that is producing the strike footage and the destroyed control towers and the fallen railway bridges. The strategic picture and the human cost exist in the same operational space, and honest analysis holds both simultaneously rather than treating one as the context for the other. The Apache helicopter pilots, who conducted a low-altitude flyby along the beach in South Carolina, represent a different category of human story, but one that connects to the operational culture of the force executing the current campaign in ways that matter. The Army initially suspended those pilots for the low flyby. Secretary Hegseth reversed the suspension. The analytical question is not whether the flyby exceeded written parameters. It almost certainly did. The question is what institutional posture toward operational boldness produces the pilots who do what the strike packages over Iran require. The wild weasel pilot who flies into an active radar threat environment, counting on the AGM-88 to kill the radar before the radar can kill him, is not a pilot who was trained to eliminate risk. He was trained to manage it, to understand where the edges are, to operate at those edges when the mission requires it, and to have the situational awareness to distinguish between boldness that serves the mission and recklessness that doesn't. The Apache pilots flying low over South Carolina beach were operating in that same cultural space, and the institutional decision to reinstate them rather than punish them reflects an understanding that the culture producing one kind of operational boldness produces the other kind as well. You do not build the force that executed the Chabahar strike by training pilots to fly only where the regulations say is safe. You build it by training pilots to fly where the mission requires and trust them to understand the difference. The Strait of Hormuz itself, as an operational zone, is the geography around which everything in this analysis ultimately organizes. The strait is 15 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through that 15-mile channel, approximately 20% of the world's traded oil transits every single day. The Iranian geography on the northern side of that channel gives the IRGC natural positional advantages that no amount of American air power fully eliminates as long as IRGC personnel, weapons, and operational will remain in the region. The United States cannot close the distance between what its military can do and what Iranian geography allows the IRGC to attempt from the shoreline. What it can do, what the current campaign is doing, is systematically eliminate the assets through which the IRGC converts that geographic position into operational capability. The radar networks that provided targeting data, the communications infrastructure through which targeting data was distributed to launch platforms, the missile and drone storage facilities where the weapons were housed before launch, the port infrastructure through which the regime was sustaining the economic foundation that funded all of the above. Eliminate those layers, and the IRGC's geographic position on the northern shore of the strait is still present. What is no longer present is the operational architecture through which that position was being weaponized. That is the strategic theory of what is happening, stated as simply as it can be stated. The geography is permanent. The infrastructure is not. And the infrastructure, Chabahar, the railway bridges, the control towers, the radar sites, the communications relays, the marine piers, is precisely what has been targeted in the campaign, whose results we are now analyzing. Iran built its resilience theory on permanent geography, plus constructed infrastructure, plus external supply. The geography remains, the infrastructure is in disarray, the external supply routes are disrupted. And the theory of resilience that depended on all three simultaneously is now a theory without two of its three foundations. What the regime does with what remains, with the geography, with whatever missile and drone inventory survived the storage facility strikes, with whatever organizational coherence the command structure can maintain through a succession crisis without a visible supreme authority, is the operational question that the next phase of this conflict will answer. The regime's leadership made the calculation that threatening Air Force One closing the strait and issuing escalatory rhetoric through Kolobov and other official channels would produce a negotiating outcome before the military pressure reached a level that made the three-legged stool's destruction inevitable. That calculation was wrong for the same reason every previous Iranian miscalculation in this conflict has been wrong. It assessed American will based on the pattern of previous American presidents rather than the actual decision-making calculus of the current one. The baby blue 747 in the air, with the president aboard, after Iran publicly threatened to shoot it down, is the clearest available symbol of that miscalculation's consequences. Iran declared its intent. Washington registered the declaration, assessed the capability to execute it, decided the older aircraft was the appropriate response to the specific threat, and continued the mission. The old blue 747 is not a retreat. It is a statement, delivered at 30,000 feet in a baby blue airframe that has stood the test of every trial and tribulation the world has thrown at it for decades, that the threat was taken seriously and answered with capability rather than concession. That is the institutional character of the response to this conflict at every level, from the wild weasel pilot who flies into the radar envelope to the aircrew carrying the commander-in-chief. The threat arrives. The capability responds. The mission continues, and somewhere on the southern coast of Iran, in the ruins of the Chabahar control tower, in the gap where the railway bridge used to cross the corridor to Mashhad, in the passenger rail stations where the Tehran to Mashhad trains are no longer arriving, the evidence of that response is visible, confirmed, and permanent.